Hi, welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. I'm Stephen Robinson. Joining me is my friend Kaivan Shroff, Democratic consultant, strategist, all-around smart person. So delighted to have you back to chat with us about what's going on in the sort of the electoral politics of right now. Thank you.
Yeah, great to be with you as always.
The moment we're recording, Mary Peltola in Alaska had announced that she's entering the Senate race. I believe now it's gone from sort of solid Republican to lean Republican. That had been sort of giving Democrats hope regarding potentially flipping the Senate. We've got Roy Cooper in North Carolina. And then there's sort of what I call the two Democratic white whales has been Maine, where we try to why everyone asks why can't we beat Susan Collins? What's going on? Like, she's got a very well established brand.
Which Graham Plattner keeps voting for her. No, I'm just kidding. But I'll behave.
But she's got a very well established brand that I do think connects to the other white whale, Texas, where it feels like for the past decade there's been a sense that Democrats could. I remember in 2016, I don't know if you recall this, there was talk that, and it's painful to even discuss it, with that period of where there was going to be such a rout, such a rejection of Donald Trump, right, and that Hillary Clinton was going to potentially flip Texas. There was some talk about that. And then there was like a poll where Biden was ahead in Texas in 2020. And then obviously, it feels like our hearts keep being broken. Yes, Beto in 2018. And then that situation as well. It's like, well, everyone hates Ted Cruz. Clearly, this is a chance. It was sort of this nationalized race, which I think has its own problems we can get into. And so now it feels like, once again, because obviously getting that state would be critical to Democratic hopes of claiming the Senate, there's a lot of discussion about those two races. What are your thoughts, basically, about the potentials, just in general, before we kind of go deeper about the potential of winning either of those states?
Sure. I think it's going to be hard to do, to be honest. And I think that is like the first step of the analysis, because I think so many people are making major assumptions about the odds and whether Texas is a purple state or it's a red state or it's, to your point, a blue state secretly, and we just need people to vote. And I think that really matters then to how you see the next steps of who should run in the primary and who can win a general and all of that. At the same time, I think, people are maybe a little bit overly optimistic about Democrats taking the Senate. And I think, yes, of course, we want the strongest, best candidates, so we have the best shot at that. At the same time, what always concerns me is it seems like the process to get to election day, primary election day, can be so divisive for Democrats. And like, it's almost like people enjoy like rehashing every old battle that ever happened. And I do think that actually costs us general election votes. And I think, 2016, to do exactly what I just said people are doing, is a great example of that, right? When you had 10 to 12% of Bernie Sanders voters end up supporting Donald Trump. Obviously, a lot of people stayed home and did not vote for Hillary Clinton. We, again, saw that happen. A lot of the left did not vote for Kamala Harris. And I think part of that has to do with the discussion leading up to election day, where instead of unifying against, to your point, we were just chatting before we started recording, right, about all of us who are aligned against this fascist government. So I think some of the discourse has just been really unproductive. Obviously, I reached out to you because one of the stories of the weekend was all this debate about Jasmine Crockett and James Tallarico and these podcasters. And I think it's a key example of people wanting to sort of weaponize the news of the day to underscore everything they've ever thought and disliked or liked about Democratic politics of the last decade.
There's one argument that being positive, we should just, if I like Crockett or you like James Tallarico, for the sake of argument, we should just talk about how great our own candidates are and not talk about the general election. But part of the dialogue is sometimes about who could win the general. I think that has come up in the sense of, if you think about, Republicans could very well have right now a 60-vote filibuster proof majority, but they nominated some loons, right? Like 2020, like Carrie Lake,
Herschel Walker.
Well, Carrie Lake caught in years that were very bad for Democrats and good for Republicans. 2022,
Yep.
she cost the governor. A Republican would have probably beaten Katie Hobbs in that year. She cost Republicans a Senate seat. I really, there was like data people were saying, like there were Trump voters who said she's crazy, and which
Truly.
again, like how is she crazier
But
than
now they're
Trump?
sending her to Iowa here, so we'll see how that goes.
Yes, that please, please send her
Do
to
it.
every state to run. So there is a sense of like, I do push back on the argument that the, sort of base knows best or primary voters know best, because sometimes we don't. We can kind of sometimes like get and make choices, and we've seen this, right? Like Republicans have made choices that were not wise.
Sure. I guess what concerns me, and we don't know who's right or wrong. Everybody thinks they're right.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people that are not necessarily the core diehard Democratic base have come up with the assessment that the smartest thing people can do is run a straight white guy in every race. And that to me seems like a non-starter for a bunch of people in the base. Validly so, because I mean, even if that is the truth, like what does that reveal? Then what's that worth fighting for? Then what are you expecting those that mobilize and do the work every day when it's not an election year to do in service of only one type of candidate? And I think part of the pushback to all this Crockett stuff, but even the Graham Plattner stuff, right, is that it does seem like, or even O'Rourke, right? Like there's always this like white male savior candidate who's going to fix the whole Democratic Party and can like do voodoo and get through to these 3 times Trump voters, which they've never actually done. And so it does seem like an agenda then. And obviously it's always a certain demographic that seems to be pushing that. And I think it is important to call that out and push back.
And I push back against that in sort of the reverse, where people will say the only reason, and there could be many reasons, but even a reason that Harris or Hillary Clinton won was because of their gender or their race. Because to the extent that even that's true, once you speak it in a weird way, you are stating that there's an electoral penalty to being a minority. And if you're stating that the only reason, and I've seen liberals make this argument, and I found it frustrating, because if you looked at the actual difference between 2020 and 2024, but like, oh, well, Biden did better because he's a white male, but like, no, like 2020, it was an anti-incumbent year and we benefited from that. And 2024, Harris did pretty well considering, the conditions on the ground. I think when that becomes an argument, then it's like, oh, well, with democracy at stake, why would you take those risks? And especially when so many swing states are decided by a couple points. I disagree with that strongly. And I don't believe that it's reflexively a straight white male is going to win. I think sometimes politics, though, is very cultural. So it's about who can connect with certain groups or who can connect with certain, but it's a dialogue that we can have that I think should not necessarily be about racial or gender essentialism. I think it should be about what your platform is and what you can connect with. I don't think I don't go after like either these folks saying one has a better shot than the other based on their cultural background or their demographic. I do think something that's more relevant sometimes can be, if your theory of the campaign is I want to get non-voters off the couch, then often non-voters are going to respond to a perceived outsider. Like, but you could disagree with that. You could say, oh, it's about charisma or something. I think those are legitimate arguments. And I think when you have it that way, then it's not like, oh, well, you're saying someone's an outsider and it's only because, but only white men can be outsiders. I mean, that's not how I'm coming from it. I'm just saying I'm looking at, like, as someone who does this, I look at patterns or procedures, and you never know. You don't know how people vote. You don't know. It's a very inexact science, right? Like, you don't know what.
Right. I do think, like, one of the things I think, and even just talking about, young voters as a demographic, which I've done a lot, I feel like there's certain folks like David Hogg, right? They just want to hammer that I'm young and it should be me, or Deja Fox, who I think was, made a good effort in her campaign, but lost by 40 points, right? Like all some of these candidates have is that I'm younger, it's my turn. And like, I think no matter what your identities that you're running on are, if you are running on identity at all, I actually interviewed Ro Khanna and he was like, I probably wouldn't really center that in my campaign if I ran for president. I'm going to talk about, I value that. That's part of who I am. It's my background, it's my family, but like, no, what's your lived experience because of that, right? So for young voters, I always say, like, I'm interested in the young candidates that say, like, I grew up at a time where we were living, under Donald Trump. The norms were not being respected the same way. Even somebody my age, in my early 30s, right, grew up learning in school. They were living through a constitutional crisis. They have a gun violence epidemic, people getting shot in schools every day. The economy's crumbling. All these different things that actually have shaped and changed how I think a young person experiences America and the world. Somebody that's even 5-10 years younger than me. That resonates. Yeah. And that should inform how you're going to do things differently, how you're going to lead differently. I think that's true for all different identities. What I will say is a lot of these who can win conversations, though, become self-fulfilling prophecies because certain folks insist XYZ candidate can never win. Everybody fights about it. And then people want to be right. So they get so mad that they sit out or they don't support. And I think that especially now, right? We just had so many examples of certain folks demanding primaries because iron sharpens iron and all these talking points. And by the way, I think it can be possible primaries can be positive if done in a way where you're not creating conspiracy theories, saying the establishment is like rigging everything, because those are the types of things that truly do get voters to stay home and tap out, party aside. And I think we do see some people, and I'll say Graham Plattner, right? I mean, for example, I don't care. He has every right to run. What I absolutely hate about his candidacy and why I think he's a liar who's unvetted is because he started his campaign. He had a neo-Nazi tattoo on his chest, which he gave to Pod Save America the video of. And then it became a national news story. And somehow he made that seem like it was a DNC op. Second, he had a link to his old Reddit in his Twitter account, which a CNN journalist found as he announced running for national office. And again, then claimed it was Janet Mills and the crew going after him, right? Like those are things that are not productive. They're fundamentally dishonest. And they do make me question whether somebody should be in the race because it will do, I guarantee you, several or many Graham Plattner supporters, if he loses this primary, will not turn out to vote. And they definitely won't turn out to vote for Janet Mills. And that's a problem to me.
Well, I think it's also good that he had the primary, that this stuff came out, because I mean, primaries can
if it's all come out,
reveal weaknesses about, reveal weaknesses about candidates we might not see otherwise.
Well, and just to add one thing, though, I think there's also this argument in so many cases that like this, right, especially Crockett, they're saying she's too well known. A lot of these unknown folks, they are unknown. So it's impossible to criticize them and say, oh, well, they can't win because of this, because of that. They have this problem. Like, whereas they attack every single thing the person who's been in office, has actually a record, is well known, does. You don't know what's out there to criticize. So we don't know what they can be criticizing or why they can't win. Terrible things will come up and be centered on when actually people focus on the general election, right? So I just think there's a lot of dumb takes and people who feel so strong and so confident.
Well, it goes into you don't know either way, right?
Sure of your position. Advocate the facts that support it, be open to being wrong, and have a normal conversation.
To me, it's like, yes, I don't like unknown. I like, they could call it the known unknowns, right? So I like the idea of, I know what to get with someone, as opposed to, which we saw with Donald Trump in certain ways, because he started with his known perception was he's a scumbag, right? And then it becomes hard to reinforce more of that. It becomes so baked in, and that sort of in a sick way benefited him, as opposed to a candidate who looks good. It's easy to sort of then reveal things about them, and that becomes a big story. I would say the balance for someone like Tallarico is that as long as there's no scandal, I always have to preface that, right? Or no sort of because you don't know.
We don't.
But beyond that gives him more potential to persuade people potentially. Crockett's challenge, and I actually do agree, but she was very well defined, is that she has a pretty broad name recognition, and So that makes it harder to swing the unfavorables away from her because people tend to make their opinion. It's not impossible. None of those things are impossible. So if you support her, go out there and make the case. I think what had I will say honestly, what had concerned me was I've seen, and I get it, right? There's a sense of, well, we tried in Texas certain strategies. Well, let's just essentially run a fairly normal mainstream, like national party liberal. We don't need to make any sort of concession on policy in Texas, even though, and it's not really red. And whenever people say that, I know it dates back to some comments Stacey Abrams had made in Georgia, but Georgia's a very different state than Texas. And, I'm in Oregon. If a Republican was saying, if a Marjorie Taylor Greene type was saying, I could win in Oregon because there's just secretly all these MAGA out there who's going to come out and vote for me, like the math doesn't math. So, that is my concern. I think I do not see how you win Texas without persuasion. The numbers are very tough for Democrats because even if you max out the black vote, which past candidates have made, the suburbs are still overwhelmingly,
Sure. Although I will say, counterpoint, right? Like, it is a red state, and like they've tried that strategy many, many times. Most recently with Colin Allred, who failed to succeed at that just last year, right? He didn't win over. He was a moderate candidate, great resume, good looking, affable. Did not win over those suburban voters, which has been the strategy of Democrats in the state for the last 30 years. So I do think it's, when you had 10 million voters who didn't show up to vote in 2022, the last midterm cycle, I do think there's a strong case to be made that, hey, you know what? We're losing the persuasion game over and over and over again. Sure, why can't a primary candidate try a mobilization strategy? And I also think it's interesting because I remember when Crockett was getting into the race, the argument was she shouldn't get into the race because she'll win the primary. Now the argument's she should drop out and you shouldn't give her money because she can't even win the primary. So it does really seem like people will just say anything. And again, it happens to be she's a high-profile Black woman. And I will say, you mentioned Stacey Abrams. When she launched, a lot of the same folks who are getting flack for what they're saying online right now were mocking her for daring to talk to Stacey Abrams about this before jumping into the race. So I think, like, also, other interesting dynamic here is now we have like sort of different silos of conversation on the internet. There's Threads, there's Blue Sky, there's Twitter. And sometimes people are pulling what's happened in one space into a different one, and not everyone who only uses some of those platforms gets the context. But I will say, from her launch, they were talking about her acrylic nails, her fake eyelashes. They hate that she has herself as her phone background. She's a narcissist, terrible person. And I do think a lot of those criticisms were racial. And like, other people are welcome to disagree, but I certainly think, people defending themselves as quote unquote not racist by saying I supported Kamala Harris or tweeting a picture of themselves and a different Black politician, which is what we've seen online in the last 48 hours, is pretty much terrible 101 as it comes to race talking, right? Like, I think like that's not too woke to say, hopefully. I mean,
yeah, I think especially because those things that were brought out, and this was actually going to be also non-woke, seems pretty damn Texas, because Texas is big and bro. So it's like a nice, polite candidate. Like, again, I often go more of region than I feel we're regional and cultural issues more so than racial. And I think, yeah, if you're running in Connecticut or something, certain aspects are going to be different. But in Texas, I mean, there's a lot to that stereotype of being a big brash person. Ann Richards, Crockett has a lot in common with Ann Richards. Ann Richards was very, said what she was on her mind and was folksy and won. I just think that the state has changed and hardened and calcified in a very partisan way that makes it tough for a mainstream Democrat to win.
Oh, agree.
And it sounds defeatist, but I'm just like, I
totally agree with you.
I just look at the numbers and it's like, but also, these are the numbers, these are demographics. So
But I also think that it's really interesting because, to the extent that Crockett has such a big profile, part of that is because, as a Black woman, she has been targeted by the most racist president and most racist Republican Party we've had in decades. And so, again, to like put that on her as a reason she can't run when she is qualified, she's much more experienced than her competitor. By the way, I mean, James Talrico, I like a lot of his stuff, but again, does he represent a party that's increasingly diverse, increasingly non-religious? I mean, I personally don't want to hear Bible verses every day from my candidate. I just don't. And like, may that go viral on TikTok every once in a while in 30, 60 seconds. And I like to see it. Yes. Is he going to be a fighter? Is he going to be able to punch hard at Abbott or, I mean, certain whatever whoever's running against, right? Like, I don't think so, right? Paxton would clobber somebody like that on personality and a debate. I believe. I don't think we've seen that skill set from him. That's not true of Crockett. And you were talking right about sort of that Texas dynamic. So again, I'm not discounting him. I'm ready to listen. I'm not in Texas. But I think when people have such strong opinions and say things like, we're not doing this, it's not 2018, like, what does that mean? To me, it means it's a bunch of white leftists who have a bunch of gripes and are pissed that they didn't get to dominate the party's direction and decisions over the last decade. And they want to use every example they can, including something as silly as some like Hollywood focused podcast, to rehash and win the battle on wokeism. And they feel every gripe and every Twitter battle they've ever had is culminated in this moment where they can say, we don't give a shit what Black Twitter or K-Hive or any of these people have to say, which again, not to say that those people always have the most valid critiques or we have to bow down or we have to listen to one group over the other all the time. It's just honestly, like, it does feel like certain people think white grievance politics is the only politics that matters. A lot of those people happen to be white men, and they feel this is their moment to take charge. And I think I have a huge problem with that as somebody in the Democratic Party. By the way, taking it away from race, we're seeing Gavin Newsom, all these other people. I have a piece in the Bulwark leaning into some pretty hard homophobia, frankly, like attacking people for being on Grindr or like implicating that they're gay or, you know, performing oral sex motions on Trump, all this stuff. Like, again, like, am I outraged by it? No, to be honest. Like, I think we're in a pretty shitty place politically, and like, I understand what's behind it. Do I think in the long run that's going to serve the Democratic Party and that's going to serve the different big tent like stakeholders that we're hoping to have to bring us over the line? I don't.
Yeah, and this again is someone who observes it, so it's like my observing it does not mean I agree with it. I always have to preface that there is a perception that the Democratic Party has become a sort of upper middle class, college educated white woman party. So not even like working class white women, because that's very different politically if you look. And obviously, queer people have been put into that as well. And that is seen as that part of the party has steered us in the wrong direction, and we're losing working class men and working class. And I'm not saying I'm not saying I agree with this. It is sort of
I think it's ironic. I'm just laughing because I feel like I'm forgetting whatever Jennifer Welch, is that her name? The same people that believe exactly what you said. Their number one icon right now is that the Wine Moms podcast, right? Where they're like going wild and like going so far left and like going like crazy on the Democrats. And I just think there's an irony there that it's just people that want to hate on the Democrats. Fine, you're allowed to do that, of course. But like, to some extent then, like, are you the right people to tell us where to go and how to do it and how to win? Like, I don't believe so. I don't think those people have been right a lot.
Yeah, I mean, idea of a big tent. I think we can objectively state the tent has shrunk in a way that's not been politically ideal for us, especially when Trump lost, for example, in 2020, he he carried as many states as Biden. But when he won in 2024, he won like 30. It's like enough. Again, if and it was possible if Republicans won Senate races in every state, Trump won his 60 Senate. Like, we are at a disadvantage, basically demographically, in the swing states and certain other states. Like, how do we get past that? The option is, of course, to be more inclusive, right? Like, everyone, you would think, like a pro-democracy, you know, let's all agree, don't shoot people in the head party should be enough, but that's not enough, right? Like, we still
I will say, like, right, like, I do think also everyone picks the data that supports their opinion. I'm not saying you're doing this, but like, everyone wants to use 2024 data. We just had elections this year, last year, right? Like, which again seems to show a shift. Of course, it wasn't the same as a presidential election year, but we're not headed into a presidential election year either. And it is interesting because I think one of the key themes is that all the debrief on we need a Joe Rogan and it's all about wokeism and DEI vanished because Trump gained with those groups, and he's now down with all of those groups he gained with by something like double digits, by 40 points, for example, with young voters in less than a year.
Oh, yeah.
I think when you have all these populist figures on the left or the right who overpromise and they underdeliver, they immediately, the right people are desperate. And if you're going to prey on that and you're going to say, I'm going to solve all your problems, going to fix the world, here's our enemy, like, yes, people that don't have a lot of time, that are easily swayable, that listen to the last thing they heard on the way to the polls are going to vote that way. They're not committed. And right, by the way, even beyond that, all the talk about young men, and let's be honest, it's about young white men is the conversation. Mm-hmm. It's hilarious to me to see these sort of like looks maxers and like podcast bros say they would vote for Gavin Newsom over JD Vance because they think JD Vance is fat and ugly. Like, that's not a demographic that you can like actually consistently invest in and pursue. So they're not to dismiss that whole category, right? But I mean, to just look at some of these figures and say, here's 5 popular YouTubers or video game streamers, and like we need to build that on the left is stupid. It's
well, a lot of the response had been that we lost these people, which I felt was insulting, that the reason we lost these working class white men and working class Black men and specifically working class Latino men, that was a huge shift, was because of, and again, people pick their own data, as you said. So it was very easy for a lot of Democratic leaders to say, oh, it was because of we got too woke, or we got too, obviously trans people, that's a problem. Don't change anything else. Let's just, let's persecute trans people. And it's not our economic policies. It was this. And then what we've seen for the elections is like, if Trump had won because America wanted to hate trans people and beat up immigrants, he'd be like at, Clinton late 90s approval right now. He's not. Like, that's not what they wanted. What they wanted was, affordability, as Mandami spoke to, and others. And there's a lot of that, but I think at the core was that there are people, yes, I don't think you're going to be able to reach people who clearly are so sick in their souls that they want to hurt people. But I do think there are people who vote for certain things in spite of the racism, or it's not enough for them to be a deal breaker. And I think that sucks. But at the same time, there are people that are reasonable to pull back.
I guess at this point, though, in 2026, I don't buy it, because I think for what are they getting out of this? Their economy is not doing better. They don't have a job. They're not getting safer. They're not getting anything out of this. So
yeah, well, I mean, his approval is in the third, but his approval is in the third.
I agree with you, but I'm saying it's the people that continue to support it. I actually do think they do want to see people suffer. Yes. I do think not even that they are so much motivated by that. They want to not be the worst off groups in society. And so that's why every time things are going badly, they find a new group to say, hey, you aggravated white voter, you're not at the bottom. It's this immigrant group. It's that immigrant group. It's naturalized citizens. It's birthright citizens. Whatever it is, they're always going to come up with that. So I do think there's a cohort that does want to see that and feel that way, and that's all that motivates them.
But I'm much happier, Kaiva, is 38% of the population,
of course.
48 or 49. And I think if you look at his approval ratings in the key swing states, he would not have won them again. Basically, these voters would. And I get it. It's frustrating. You wanted to believe, like, come on, like, he was a terrible person. Why did you believe that eggs would get cheaper? But I can't put myself necessarily in the footsteps of someone who was feeling this way. But I do think there is a way to address that and be, back to your point earlier, to be inclusive of everyone. I think what happens, though, is it winds up being this battle over who is in charge of the party, who can speak for the party. So I tend to be for the situation of, I don't think that there's anyone who should shut up in the party. Everyone should have a voice. Yep. Everyone should communicate. And I don't think that your existence, I mean, this has happened, and and we see it even with people. I get it. Like, I get the sense of like, I live in Portland, right? So someone being defund the police or real stuff. This is embarrassing. This is her helping us lose elections. It's like, we should be able to, especially because JD
You got your
Vance.
furry costume in the back, Portland?
Exactly. Like JD Vance is buddies with neo-Nazis. So I can be like, look, my tent includes people who have views on law enforcement that I might not agree with, but that's very different from the vice president having buddies who are neo-Nazis. And I think we can all debate policy. I think the core of it is that we might disagree on policy, but we fundamentally agree on the humanity of people. And that should be the dialogue I want to see in every debate or everything.
And I think that's the thing, though, right? Like, part of what frustrates me so much about this conversation about whatever the Jasmine Crockett situation, and I saw you did a tweet which I disagreed with, which was why I DM'd you, like you quoted whatever somebody saying like, this is why Nick Fuentes gets support online, and I'm not saying you endorse that view, but because like of the backlash to the podcasters, they were forced to apologize, and everyone's saying they were forced, and like this is silencing, and this is shutting down, free speech. That's bullshit. Like, let's be honest. These are two people who have a media business who waxed poetic on something they weren't articulate about and weren't well informed about, which they conceded. And another audience that felt they had more information, which maybe they don't, responded and used their voice and their platform, most of which were much smaller, and expressed a view, which then they took as feedback, as people with a goal, with a business model, and said, we're going to apologize. It happened to be right before the Golden Globes, and that's kind of part of their shtick, right? They cover culture. They don't talk about politics. And so they chose to apologize. That is not, Hillary Clinton's invisible hand whacking somebody, making them apologize. That's not the DNC rigging something, making them apologize. That's two people who are either actually learned something and took feedback from their audience, which is fine, or who aren't willing to stand by their views and opinions. And I have to say, as somebody that often shares views that I get roasted for on the left, I just had a piece on MS Now people didn't like about how I think Mamdani overpromised and he will underdeliver. And, it's going to be let it be a referendum on the far left, and don't go and rig the rent board and don't go and sabotage him because he'll just use that as a scapegoat. People didn't like that take, whatever. I didn't say, oh, I'm so sorry and blah, 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 because I stand by my things. I'm thoughtful about them and I believe in them. So maybe if they were more thoughtful, they would have been able to stand by it. But I'm saying to, again, play the victim all the time and pull out these grievance politics is so ridiculous and it's tiring. And I think, again, it's so I do think it's racist to say that people in the party always and only weaponize race to shut down conversation. It's like, no, I mean, of course, some people weaponize identity in the world at times, and they have, but the same characters that are saying it now tend to say it about every single thing. I can't come up with a list of where they've said, oh, great point. I actually do see what you said is a problem. This was racist. This was problematic intra-party, right? They're always willing to call Trump racist. But when actually a contingent of the Democratic Party is called out as problematic, sexist, racist, it's always, oh, your identity politics, you're too woke, you're trying to shut down conversation. So nobody in the Democratic Party has ever done anything racist, sexist, problematic. I mean, that cannot be. So what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think their response is that when Trump is at such degree of it becomes sort of like, it's almost like being a hypochondriac while you have terminal cancer. It's like, why are you? And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that tweet that I shared was more when people would not accept the apology. And there was stuff going around of where then it was like, I'm someone who's like, okay, look, someone apologize, move on. No, that is he was being somewhat melodramatic. I should always mention.
I think he believes that.
Retweets are not endorsements.
No, they're not. But I think the original poster does think
that. Yeah. I don't think that alone is why you get from into this. I think that is being indelicate to an issue. Having lived in Portland, I've seen where people will not, especially because it's the Northwest, right? They will refrain from dialogues.
Sure.
Because people will immediately say you're racist or sexist.
And I think that's a problem. That is a problem.
And they won't have, and the problem with that is not so much boohoo white people's feelings, is that then it's like, oh, the next year, everyone pulled their kids out of this school and now are at private school, and you go talk to them and it was like, oh, well, this happened, but I couldn't rate. And they could have had the dialogue, had a discussion and a convenient, but it's because if you don't, people still vote. people
Sure.
still vote, with ballots and with their money. And I want to be able to say, not in a weird way, safe space, Kaivan, but of like, let's have a dialogue.
No, but like
I'm
normal
not going to
people,
say you're
right?
a bad
Like I think
person for
normal
having an
people in their
opinion.
lives, and I 100% agree with what you just said. Normal in their lives, they go to the barbershop, they go to the family dinner table, they have conversations, they share an opinion. They may not be 100% well thought out. They don't get disinvited the next day because they
Yeah.
weren't perfect. They didn't say it perfectly. People listen, right? They exchange ideas. I do think Democrats have brought, and I've done a lot of formal education, and I think a lot of those tools from the classroom about who gets power, who gets to talk, like are we snapping, like whatever it is, like bringing that into the political sphere, especially in the persuasion space, is stupid. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. It shuts down conversation. It's elitist. It's out of touch. It's all the things everyone says. That is very different, I think, than intra-party discussions where you are dismissing out of hand any mention of the real context of which people live in that is affected by their gender, race, and ideology.
Absolutely.
So I think that to see that dismissed so aggressively and every time, and by the way, right, this was all the culmination, this little episode over this weekend, of months of this conversation, starting from the launch of Crockett's campaign. So I do think that I hope we can all do better. I'm sure, I'm sure I've not been open to conversation at times and vice versa, but
No, I mean, I agree with you a lot about
we're
Mandami potentially overpromising and that we shouldn't sabotage him and so forth. And it's interesting. I think people will take opinions and immediately sort of want to label people. So if I say that, if I write something about that, suddenly I'm like a centrist shill. But then I will say like, oh, I like Mandami's this idea on this compared to that, and suddenly I'm in DSA. People want
Right.
to sort
Yes,
of
I know. So that's
cement people in certain things, and
right?
that's not who I am.
I posted a compliment and they're like, "You're a flip flopper." I'm like, "No, I like this thing about him. This other thing I don't like." Like, what are you talking about? Anyways.
No, I think that's sort of what being constructive is. I think in the time we have left, because we're respectful for your time.
Thank you.
I think the challenge I see with Crockett, I see again, is that I personally do not see how a mainstream Democrat can win in Texas. That is my opinion. Mm-hmm. It is not that I have lack of faith in her as a Black woman, or I think all these sort of things. That is just my opinion. And I have kind of questions about sort of her campaign. But at the same time, I don't think there's necessarily a savior who can win. I do think the potential swing vote, the ones you can activate, that could potentially, if we want to centralize gender and race, is college-educated white women. This has been a demo that had years ago been right-leaning, but has slowly been shifting towards Democrats. And, Harris won them.
Yeah.
But narrowly, I think that can expand. But I think, to me, any argument of persuasion has to be one that includes everyone. If you are reaching out to someone and you're excluding other people, I don't think that like connecting with young white men means you're being a jerk to Black women. If you are, there's a problem with how you're communicating.
In fact, like in the last 10 seconds comment, but like I don't see why we can't have a system where people that love Jasmine Crockett love her. People that love James Tyler go love him. They both reach the new types of voters people think they can reach. And then in the general election, whoever wins is excited to try to bring those voters with them and get that candidate over the edge and win that race. Like that could happen despite all the toxic behavior from the online people and the super partisan people and whatever. Especially, by the way, it seems like the candidates are acting and conducting themselves that way in this race. So why would we ruin that? Like, anyways.
I totally agree. I don't think the candidates in this case are making this some sort of proxy. Everything's been the proxy war since 2016, alas. And I wish we can just get past that. Thanks so much for having this.
Yes, always a pleasure. You have to come on my new pod, by the way. I will message you after.
Please do. I'd be delighted. Thank you. Where can folks find you?
Yes, so I have a new podcast, Extremely Reasonable, on Spotify. And otherwise, I'm Kai Von Troff, just like my name spelled, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Like, share, subscribe. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.